Spain in the 1920s was a country in transition, trying to juggle old traditions with the pressures of modernity. To understand the heart of Spain during this time, we need to look at several key areas: its economy, technology, politics, and more. Let's start with the economy. Spain, back then, was still pretty rural. Most of the country was made up of farmers, and agriculture was the big player. Think olive oil, wine, citrus fruits, and wool. But here's the catch. Agriculture wasn't exactly thriving, efficiency was low, productivity wasn't great, and modernization was barely a thing. The agricultural sector had a long way to go. At the same time, the mining industry in places like Catalonia and the Basque Country was vital, especially for coal and iron, but even that was outdated. The country was also reeling from the aftermath of World War I. There was inflation, high debt, and general economic instability. Spain had some industry growing, particularly in textiles and steel, but it was way behind other European nations. And let's not forget that Spain was involved in the Rif War in Morocco, which drained resources and strained the economy even more. Now, about technology, Spain was kind of lagging behind the rest of Europe in this department. While other countries were racing ahead with industrial innovations, Spain was still stuck using older practices, especially in rural areas. However, in cities like Barcelona and Madrid, there were some advancements, particularly in textiles, food processing, and steel production. Infrastructure improvements, like railroads, telecommunication networks, and electric lighting, did make their way to the cities. But overall, Spain's scientific and technological progress wasn't exactly groundbreaking. This lack of modernization mirrored what was going on politically. The 1920s were rough for Spain politically. The country was constantly in flux, with instability marking nearly every turn. King Alfonso XIII was in power at the start of the decade, but things were falling apart. Political fragmentation, economic struggles, and social tensions were just too much for the monarchy to handle. In 1923, General Miguel Primo de Rivera stepped in after a military coup and took control. He ruled as a dictator, promising to restore order and bring stability. But his regime didn't last long, mainly because of increasing opposition from workers' movements, nationalists, and regional leaders. Spain's military also got more involved in the political scene, especially since the Rif War was ongoing. The whole country felt the tension. On the international stage, Spain was isolated, and tensions with France and Morocco only made things worse. Then, there was the matter of Spain's military and weaponry. The 1920s saw Spain caught up in the Rif War, fighting against Berber tribes in Morocco. The tactics they used were traditional: heavy artillery, air raids, blockades. Yet, they were struggling. The Berbers used guerrilla tactics, making it tough for the Spanish army to keep control. And the weapons? Well, Spain's military hardware wasn't up to par with the major European powers. They had outdated rifles, artillery, and naval equipment. They even started using planes, but aviation was still in its infancy. The war, in the end, was a failure, both militarily and politically, contributing to the downfall of Primo de Rivera. Socially, Spain was still deeply traditional, with most of the population living in rural areas. But there were pockets of industrialization, especially in cities like Barcelona and Madrid, where the working class was starting to grow. Labor unions and anarchist groups were becoming stronger, especially in places like Catalonia and Andalusia. Meanwhile, the rural population lived in poverty, with harsh working conditions. Social and economic inequalities were everywhere, and tensions between conservative elites and progressive labor movements grew. The divide was particularly noticeable in regional tensions. Places like Catalonia and the Basque Country wanted more autonomy, which led to further political strain. Healthcare? Well, that was underdeveloped. Rural areas had limited access to healthcare, and in cities, medical services were still basic. Life expectancy was lower, infant mortality rates were high, and the overall quality of life wasn't great for most Spaniards. Cities might have had a few more hospitals, but they weren't accessible to everyone. On the whole, living conditions were tough, especially for the working class. Overcrowded housing, poor sanitation, and widespread poverty were all too common. Ethnically, Spain in the 1920s was pretty homogeneous, with the majority identifying as ethnically Spanish. But there were significant minority groups, especially in places like Catalonia, the Basque Country, and Galicia. The Basques and Catalans, in particular, had their own distinct languages and cultures, which caused tension with the central government. And of course, there were smaller communities, like the Romani people in Andalusia and Jewish and Arab populations in cities like Seville and Granada. Immigration was low, but towards the end of the decade, rural workers started moving to the cities to find industrial jobs. Key figures in Spain during this time were shaping the country's future. General Primo de Rivera, of course, was one of the most significant figures. His military coup in 1923 brought him to power, and though his rule started with some popular support, it didn't take long for opposition to grow. Spain's King Alfonso XIII also remained influential until 1931 when he lost support, and the Spanish Republic was established. There were also key political figures like Francisco Largo Caballero, a socialist leader who would later play a major role in Spain's political landscape. Now, let's talk about crime, underground movements, and secret societies. Spain in the 1920s wasn't just about politics and wars, it was also home to a lot of social unrest. In Catalonia, especially, anarchist groups were thriving. These groups were responsible for strikes, protests, and acts of sabotage against the government and capitalist institutions. The tensions between left-wing movements and the monarchy created an atmosphere of civil unrest, with political assassinations becoming more common. Secret societies like the Freemasons also had a presence, though the Catholic Church and conservatives were suspicious of them. And of course, organized crime in Spain was alive and well, with mafia groups and smuggling rings operating in the cities. Culturally, the 1920s were an exciting time for Spain. Artists, writers, and intellectuals made a huge impact, particularly with the rise of avant-garde movements like Surrealism and Modernism. Salvador Dalí and Joan Miró were beginning to find their footing, although their biggest successes came later on. Spanish cinema started to emerge as well, producing influential works. Literature was flourishing too, with writers like Ramón María del Valle Inclán and Miguel de Unamuno exploring themes of national identity, existentialism, and modernism. Flamenco music and dance were also important to Spanish culture, blending folk and classical styles into something truly unique. Religious life in Spain was another important factor in the 1920s. The country was overwhelmingly Catholic, and the church had a huge influence on both social and political life. Catholicism was deeply embedded in daily life, with festivals, processions, and the veneration of saints being common, especially in rural areas. But there was also tension between the church and secular forces, particularly from left-wing intellectuals, anarchists, and socialists. Mysticism and alternative religious movements began to rise as well, though Catholicism remained the dominant force. Spain in the 1920s was also rich with folklore, legends, and myths. These stories were tied to regional traditions, like the tales of the gitanos, gypsies, in Andalusia, or the mythological creatures from the Basque Country. You had the Basa Jaun, a forest giant in Basque folklore, or dragons in Catalonia. The figure of El Cid remained popular, representing the romanticized past and national pride. There were a lot of significant events in the 1920s that would shape the future of Spain. The rise of Primo de Rivera's dictatorship, the ongoing Rif War, and Spain's eventual economic recovery by 1929 were all crucial moments. But despite some recovery, Spain was already on the road to greater conflict. The political divisions that would lead to the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s were already beginning to take shape. And lastly, when it comes to stereotypes, Spaniards in the 1920s were often seen as passionate and deeply tied to their regional cultures. The fiery bullfighter, the flamenco dancer, and the passionate lover were common stereotypes. Spain was often thought of as a place where life was slower and more relaxed, though, of course, that image came with political and social tensions brewing underneath. So, that was Spain in the 1920s. a country caught between tradition and modernity, political instability and cultural richness. Thanks for tuning in to The World as We Know It and joining me in another chapter of world history. As always, there are more detailed notes in the description, and we welcome any requests or recommendations in the comments section. If you found this video helpful, entertaining, or educational, please consider liking this video and subscribing to support our channel. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video.